In this video, we're going to take a look at configuring Excel services in a secure store with SQL Server Authentication scenario. So the first thing that we need to do is to make sure that the unattended service account is configured in Excel services. Now, if you've already configured an unattended service account, then there's no need to change anything. You don't need to change any permissions or anything. You can just leave it be. But if you have not yet set up an unattended service account, then that's the first step. So here in SharePoint Server Central Administration, under Application Management, I'm going to go down to Manage Service Applications. And first, I'm going to go down to Secure Store Service. And here in Secure Store Service, if you remember from the previous video in this series, we created the Unattended Account Target application. And that's what we need to configure in Excel Services. So I'm going to navigate back up to Manage Service Applications, go to my Excel Services service application, Global Settings, and scroll down to the very bottom. You'll see we have an Application ID box here, and that's where I want to type the name of my Secure Store target application for the unattended service account, which, as we saw a second ago, is called Unattended Account. And because this target application has already been configured, there's no additional configuration we need to do in Excel Services as far as the unattended account goes. So I'll just click OK, and our unattended service account has been set up. Now, very quickly, while I'm here in the Excel Services settings, you'll notice that I have my root set as a trusted file location, and I have a data connection library configured. And you want to make sure that you have the appropriate trusted file locations and trusted data connection libraries for your configuration in order to be able to successfully publish things using Excel services. Now, the next thing that we want to take a look at is how to configure the Secure Store settings in Excel itself. So I'm going to switch over to a client computer where I have Excel installed, and I'll go down to Start, and we'll open up Excel. And the first thing I want to do is go up to the Data tab, Data from Other Sources, from SQL Server, and type in my SQL Server name, which is SQL Server 1. And I'm going to go ahead and use my SQL Server Authentication credentials, which is SQL Data Access. Click Next. And I have a database called Litware Servers, and this just contains some service status information. You can see the table here. Click Next. And then for Excel services, I want to click on Authentication Settings. And I want to choose a Secure Store ID. And if you recall in the first video in this series, we set up a Secure Store target application for use with SQL Server Authentication, and we just called it SQL Auth. Click OK. Click Finish. And I'm just going to choose a pivot table report here. Type the password for my SQL Data Access account. Now, it's important to understand that Excel is connecting to SQL Server directly using my SQL Server credentials. Excel itself doesn't use Secure Store. Secure Store is only used when you render the Excel workbook from a SharePoint site using Excel services. So the Secure Store ID that we just set won't be used until we actually render the workbook through Excel services. In this data set, I basically just have some location and status information for a bunch of servers. My Chicago server is offline, but London, New York, and Seattle are all online. And this, of course, could be any data that you might have in SQL Server. Now, I can publish this workbook as it is right now, and it will properly render through Excel services. And the connection information, which we set up a moment ago with the Secure Store ID, will actually be embedded in the workbook. And whenever you open this workbook using Excel services, it will reference that SQL Auth Secure Store target application. Alternatively, we can export an Office data connection file which contains that Secure Store information, and then in the future, when we create additional reports with additional Excel workbooks, we can connect to that existing Office data connection file, and our database connections will already be set up. So let's take a look at how to do that. Data tab, Connections. This is the connection that we're currently using. Properties, definition. And again, if I look at authentication settings, you'll see that I have SQL Auth configured for my Secure Store ID. And I want to click Export Connection File. And then I want to navigate to a Trusted Data Connection Library in SharePoint Server. So here's my Litware Data Connection Library, and I'm just going to call this Server Status Excel. And it's saving my data connection. And I can cancel out of here. And let's go ahead and publish this. File, save and send. Save to SharePoint. I'm going to browse for a location. And I want to go to a document library on SharePoint Server. And I'll just call it Server Status. Click Save. And it's going to go ahead and render my workbook using SQL Services. And you can see here's my server status, and this is live data that we're getting using our SQL Server Authentication account through Secure Store. Now you see my Chicago server is false, it's offline. Now if I were to switch over to SQL Server, expand databases, here's my Litware Servers database. Here's the server status table. If I edit it, and I bring my Chicago server back online just by typing true here. If I go back to my client computer and go up to Data, refresh, you'll see Chicago is now online. So it is refreshing the data from SQL Server. Now, of course, SQL Services has various cache settings, and you may not see the refresh right away depending on what your data cache settings are. But in this case, I've set my cache settings to 0 so I can see the data right away. And you can see I am able to refresh data through Secure Store and my SQL Server Authentication account. So that's a quick look at setting up SQL Services to use SQL Server Authentication through Secure Store. You can leave feedback on this video or any of our TechNet content by going to the TechNet article and clicking the rating and feedback control at the top of the page. Or you can send feedback to docbi@microsoft.com.